Good morning, viewers. Welcome to this edition of Focus on Parliament on Civic Space TV. My name is Agather, Atuhaire, your host, and as usual, we discuss some of the big issues that unfold in Parliament in a week. And this week there are quite a number, but we will discuss the few major ones that time will allow us to discuss. The first one would be the issue of the floods in Mbale and the larger Bugisu region, where scores have died and others have been displaced by floods that happened on Saturday, 30th June. And in that, we discuss the Prime Minister's statement to the House on how government is handling the issue of floods, and really it arose the debate about disaster management in this country and how we are handling it. We also would like to discuss the bills that the President has returned to Parliament for consideration, the powers that he derives under Article 91 of the Constitution, and how that affects separation of powers, the independence of Parliament, or if it is really something that we should look into. There's also the issue of the proposed redesignation of the current chairperson of PAC local government, Honorable Martin Ojara Mapenduzi, that the Speaker sort of blocked but guided that it should be done differently. And then also, how does that affect legislation or affect the powers of parties and their whips and the opposition in this case, which is affected if it is the Speaker or the House that has the final say on who becomes the leader of these committees. To discuss that and more, I have a panel of members of a Member of Parliament and people in civil society that have done a lot of work in legislative processes. And I'm going to begin with the gentleman on my left. You're welcome, Honorable, Dr. Werikhe, to the show.
Thank you, Agatha. Good morning, viewers. It's a pleasure being here.
Dr. Werikhe works with African Leadership Institute, and it has done a lot of scorecards and research on parliamentary processes. You're also welcome. We have Honorable Sarah Opendi, the woman MP for Tororo. You're welcome to the show, Honorable. We are glad to have you.
Thank you very much for inviting me to this show. It's my first time.
Yeah, we have wanted to have you since
Civic Space. My apology. You've always reached out,
yes,
but due to conflicting programs, I could not make it.
No, we are
but
glad
I'm glad
you made
to be here this time, and good morning, viewers.
Yes, thank you, Honorable, for coming. And last but not least, has been on this panel a couple of times, Jeff Wadulo, who works with Civil Society Budget Advocacy Group and is the Parliamentary Liaison for CSBAG. You're welcome, Jeff.
Thank you, Agatha, for having me. Good morning, viewers.
Yes, I am glad, particularly today, because I have two people whose region is now in the eye of the storm including you, when you're talking about Eastern Uganda.
She also suffers the floods from River Manafa.
So we'll put it into perspective. You don't want to bring people who have not seen the problem to discuss it. I'm going to start with you, Dr. Gerald.
Yes.
The issue of Mbale floods. How many districts, if you know, have been affected? Because some say Mbale, but others say it is, a problem. Because the chief opposition whip told me that he had also had to run to his constituency, which I don't think is in Mbale district.
This was a region.
Yeah, because of the issues.
The information I get is that if we take the case of River Manafa flooding, it originates all the way from Bududa, flows through Manafa district and then to Mbale and ends up in Butaleja. But the final destination is in Pologoma River, which is I think in Chibuku and Namtumba. So you can see that it's very long. And if you look at the terrain, apart from the floods, there are also communities that are on the mountain, on the hills. So these usually suffer landslides. This time landslides may have not killed, but since it's still raining, there is potential that the soil could also come down and kill other people. To me, the deaths so far, we are hearing of 26 confirmed, but we don't know others may die in the course of the time because of other factors like treatment and response, as you have put it.
Or some bodies which have not yet been recovered.
Exactly. As you saw, the people pulling someone using bare hands, meaning the response is not adequate. But the Bugisu region issue and maybe elsewhere, as Africa Leadership Institute, we did a very good study, and we shared with government a policy brief on management of disasters in Uganda, and we looked at it holistically. One of the issues we pointed out was that whereas we have a robust structure from the districts, that is the disaster management committees, but they are idle. You find that they use a multi-sectorial approach whereby when a problem occurs, people have to call each other and they take a very long time to actually take a decision. So we prefer that the Disaster Coordination Office in the Office of the Prime Minister is empowered, including resources to be available every time, and also early warning signals and training communities around, so that if the government cannot respond, but the communities can have a way of helping themselves first as they wait for other support. But we see that there are still gaps. And then the other factor, which we are not really serious about as a country, is to do with land use. Whereas the Constitution gives the right of ownership of land to the people, but the government has the power to regulate the planning aspect. If you look at Mbale, the town, it's not a new city. It has been there for almost 100 years. But the effect of floods has not been always like this. You go and check, for instance, as you're entering Mbale city, it used to be a swamp where people would grow super rice in the swamp. The water would come from up, it's absorbed, it's used there in the swamp, and then much of it also goes to Doko and other areas in Butaleja. So when we built the China-Uganda Friendship Park, the whole place is cemented, and there's no way for water to pass. So that's why you saw the industrial park swallowed almost with the water. If you go opposite police, Mbale police barracks, that stretch was a forest in the town. It used to absorb water, and the water would go all the way through Maluku, then Chiviso. And so it was, you knew that the water passes here. Recently I was there, I saw fuel stations, I saw schools, Oxford Comprehensive, I saw residences. So I'm asking myself, who is approving this, and where is the government in this? If you look at the rivers, like Manafa, I think the law says a certain distance should be given, but people have constructed or built up the river banks. So nothing is there to hold the water. So we have the nature fighting us, but we are also helping nature to fight ourselves. So that is my observation of the whole situation.
Thank you, Dr. Werikhe. Honorable Sarah, what is your view about the disasters, particularly the ones in Mbale now? And were you satisfied with the statement from government that the Prime Minister tabled in Parliament?
First and foremost, my condolences to the families that lost their loved ones, but also those who are displaced. May not have lost their families, but they are displaced from their homes. And we all know how discomforting it can be to be away from home and actually to lose most of your possession. But also, secondly, it is extremely unfortunate that as a government, we have all these beautiful laws and policies on the environment, but you see us again violating those very laws and policies that we have put in place. It's quite a contradiction, because you cannot talk about one thing, sustaining the environment, protecting the environment, but then do the opposite. The developments that we have seen over the years in Mbale are partially responsible for what we are now seeing happening in Mbale. We've been having floods, people being displaced during rainy seasons in other parts of Bugisu. But now to see this in Mbale, I actually did not believe it at first. I thought maybe the reporter has failed to distinguish between Manafa, Bududa, and Mbale.
No.
Until I looked and saw the buildings, and then I said, oh, this is Mbale. So it's quite unfortunate. But also the human action is also to blame. Apart from the government, the people themselves are to actually blame for whatever is going on currently. So the law enforcement agencies, really it's very clear that no one must build 200 meters away from a river, from a lake. It's 200 meters. But to see people, you know, constructing up to the river banks, and nobody is actually bothered, nobody is actually taking action to ensure that they restrain people from these actions, it's quite disturbing. There is supposed to be an environmental police. I don't know whether this environmental police, something that I need to understand, is only restricted to the center here. The environmental police should be all over the country.
But even in the center, the things are there.
Yeah, but it should be all over the country to ensure that actually the laws that are in place are actually implemented. And I'm very sure that if these good laws that we have and policies were implemented, we would not be where we are now. But of course, I think we expect these disasters to happen. And this also goes to now the responsible sector, the Prime Minister, who is the overall head of government business. And this Ministry for Disaster Preparedness, they are supposed to actually know that such disasters will actually occur. And there must be a warning early. They should have warned people early that now the rains are coming, please ensure that you take, move away from these dangerous areas. That does not happen. I've moved to other countries, and there are these warning signals, warnings, and people move, by the way. There is a place we went to, I don't remember, I think in Turkey, the side of Ankara, that way, and we saw empty houses. So we're asking, how comes these houses are empty? And they said, no. During those difficult times when we have severe winter, people move from those areas that are greatly affected to those other villages. So when the situation normalizes, they move back. So this is what should happen, that we should know that during such rainy seasons, we are likely to have such disasters, and disasters that could even result into loss of lives. So people must be moved. Whether you like it or not, you should be moved. But that doesn't happen. So I hope that moving forward, from what we have realized, we shall not see this happening again. Government should be able to come in early enough to issue these warnings, but also ensure that there is action. But also it is high time we implemented our laws and policies. We have degraded the environment so much. Uganda, a country that was dubbed the Pearl of Africa by Winston Churchill, with forest cover of about 45%. Today, it's a shame.
It's below 10%.
Yeah, the forest cover is, I think, at 9%, which is a complete shame. So I think we need to restore. We may not get back to what we were before, because I know we have built houses where we shouldn't have built, but at least let us ensure that whatever is there now, let us protect it, and we do not degrade the environment further.
Thank you, Honorable. You were talking about environment police and saying, does it work in the center? And I was wondering, have you seen environment being protected in the central here?
Now, let me give you some information. I live in Chira municipality, and that is Bukasa Chirinya, where we are constructing the inland port. Around there, we have a place called the Lost City. I don't know who named it. It is actually a swamp that people filled, and you see Umeme taking electricity, National Water is taking electricity, and people are filling soil every day. They sell plots of land at between 1 million and 2 million. And these are LOCs. So I don't know whether NEMA can see that, because it's supposed to be a huge wetland up to the forest. So they are not doing anything anywhere.
It's sad. It's sad. There's a school that is, you know, where the bypass, the northern bypass passes. That all that used to be a swamp. There's an international school there
Right.
called Akron. Then the houses and flats that have come up. So even in Kampala, it's disastrous.
It's a pity. It's a complete pity. But I also know that where there is a will, there is a way.
The problem is
So
there is
the
no
facts, the clear fact that government has not prioritized
Yes.
the environmental police, and yet it is there, supposed to be there.
Yeah.
So if there is no funding to this sector, then we shall not have the police doing its work. But also know the other side of it. You remember the fight between the environmental police in somewhere in northern Uganda, where people were cutting forests and soldiers came and beat up policemen who were actually
We're
Protecting
protecting the forest. So the environmental police is there, but it's not, you know,
empowered.
it's not empowered enough. They are few, but also the other side of it, of impunity. How can one arm of one group of security
Be beating
another one which is doing its work? So
It's
there
really
is complete
unfortunate.
impunity
Political
in this country, and for as long as those responsible do nothing, the situation will continue.
So, Jeff, I'm going to bring you in on that point. Honorable is saying, I hope this doesn't happen again. And I wanted to tell her, unfortunately, it will happen again. Because we have seen these things happen. We have seen River Nyamamba in Kasese kill people year in, year out. The landslides in Wadulo, I think there's a time they had killed up to hundreds of people. And they're also happening almost every year.
Right.
Uganda is ranked 15th globally and first in Africa as disaster prone. I think at some point disasters were killing over 200 people. I don't know if now it's higher or lower. We have a ministry of disaster preparedness. We have laws. We have a policy on disaster preparedness. Why do we look like we don't manage or prevent those disasters from happening, but we come in after they have happened, but even then the intervention isn't sustainable?
Yeah, thank you so much, Agatha and colleagues. When the minister, Honorable Opendi, was referring to...
Yes, she was minister for so
Yes.
long. Even I keep
Always a
thinking,
minister. Yes, why not?
yeah.
I actually knew her more as a minister. Yeah, when she referred to the Churchill's famous quote about Uganda being the pearl of Africa,
Yes.
that was really spot on. But there are many people who are working every day to make it the peril of Africa. And perhaps maybe through ignorance. You know, the whole thing around climate change, I think maybe the challenge is because it happens slowly over a very long time. So there is huge ignorance right from the top pyramid of decision making up to the end user, the citizen, about the nexus between climate change and disaster, and perhaps the relationship between disaster and human life and property. So whatever we're seeing now is actually a product of that absence of knowledge and information. You'll mix in a little bit of impunity and so on, but I'll tell you, because of that absence, you see, who was I referring to? And I said, if the effects of climate change were immediate, you know, like you saw how, by the way, even somebody said, even these viruses like the COVID-19 are a product of climate change. The way viruses metamorphose into those that actually create danger for human life. But you could see even the way we are reacting to COVID-19 the first time, people were laughing at it. But when it started hitting us, when it started getting out of statistics to numbers, to people we know, you saw the transition of how people became very serious about using masks. And so the whole area of connecting climate change and the impact on disaster, and then also the ramifications in terms of human life loss and property, is something that we perhaps need to change in the way we handle our behavior change communication, right from the top of the decision-making bodies down up to the citizen, so that they know whatever they are doing is cumulatively, slowly impacting on the environment, and one day the nature will come back at us. For the Mbale, by the way, I grew up for the major part of my younger life in Mbale, and for me this was the first of its kind, to have floods in Mbale killing people. That was for me a first time, and I was also as shocked as the Honorable was that that was actually happening in the midst of this city. And then when I talked to some colleagues in UNMA, the guys who do weather forecasting and so on. By the way, they also could not. They predicted that there would be slightly more rains than usual. But you also know that the nature of disaster is that rain can be a little more in different parts of the country, but the impact of disaster is felt elsewhere. So what happened is that the rains that were a little more, but because of the cumulative effects of human action along the slopes of the different rivers that feed into, go through Mbale, which is more or less like a basin, before it delivers it to River Mpologoma, which is about a 50-kilometer stretch from the Mbale city. So you can see how big that is. Cumulatively, there have been all these things, environmental degradation effects that my colleague Gerald talked about, but also the silting of the rivers over time made it very difficult for them to hold a little extra water. So when it rained a little more, this was it. But remember, downstream, they had already blocked the pathways for water. So the water that would have gone through industrial area and down up to Butaleja, River Mpologoma was blocked. So there was feedback. So it didn't need a lot of rain for that to happen. But also because of lack of information or ignorance, as it were, that's what you see us having in Mbale. But from a preparedness point of view, there's a World Bank study which said, if we put a lot of emphasis on preparation for disaster and mitigation, we would save, for every $1, we would save $7 or $8. $1 spent on prevention and or mitigation would save us. You could see the kind of destruction. I don't know if some of you saw some videos which are doing the rounds on social media. There's one I saw where so many cows were being. Did you see that one? Did I share that with you? They were being flushed down the river, so, going below a certain bridge. So many cows. Now I'm trying to imagine. Before the person who took the video came, I'm sure there must have been many that had. And after he took the video. So you can imagine, and for the cows, maybe because of their nature, somehow they're keeping their heads up. But were being flashed and definitely would be hit by stones and what. And so imagine the owner of that kraal, of all that livestock, in just 1 minute or two lost. What about human life? So you can relate the difference between $1 in preparation. Say, no, we're going to have rains. This place is disaster prone. Please move all your properties, life, and so on for a time being, and then come back when it is. So, but now when it comes to preparedness, I would now like to speak about the role of government. You know, we have got a Public Finance Management Act, and there's a sections 26, which talks about contingencies. There's a contingencies fund. But me and you could find out how much we have in there, because they changed the law. The original part of the law, section 26, was saying that government would use 3.5% of the previous financial year's budget to finance the contingencies fund.
Yeah.
So if you could use, for example, what was the last year's budget? Was it about 41.8? Let's use 40 for purposes of basically getting calculations. That would be about 1.4 trillion for the contingencies fund. Now, the original law also said that we would use 85% of that money in the contingencies fund for supplementary budgets. Then would have 15% for emergencies, disaster, and so on. What happened is that was repealed. Do you know the original 3.5 was reduced to 0.5?
Yeah.
0.5 of the budget, the entire contingencies fund. Then how much does that give you? Maybe about 200 billion. Now you had the office of the Prime Minister saying they took about 150 billion to respond to the Karamoja food crisis.
So now they have.
So how much is there in the now? So because now that's the entire contingencies fund before even you start speaking about disaster. So you and me can guess how much is there in the contingencies fund, and how much is there for disaster. So we, as a country, I think that there is need for something that we have to do fundamentally to relate the effects of climate change to disaster, but also in terms of policy. How do we consciously plan and budget for such eventualities? And then, you know, because it's a multi-stakeholder issue, and how everyone plays their role. I think for me, that's the perspective we should use.
Thank you, Jeff. Dr. Werikhe, I would like you also to weigh in on that. We have seen these issues happen year in, year out. I think in Mbale, in the Elgon area, between 2008 and 2018 alone, there were like 400 landslides. Now, apart from us not preparing and mitigating, even after it happens, our response is not satisfactory, because there was an issue of building houses to resettle Bududa people.
Right.
Up to now.
In Bulambuli.
Yeah, they have.
Somebody stole the money.
They have never been resettled. I think actually
Oh my God.
some people have taken government to court for failing to protect them.
Yeah.
What exactly is the problem? Is it still a problem of funds, the lack of funds? Like Honorable Maria Chwanka used to say that when she dies, they should write on her tombstone, when she was Minister for Finance, and they should write money is not enough. But is it an issue of money is not enough in this country?
Wow.
No, I think from my own perspective, and also from my colleague, you see that the issue is not only money, but also the planning problem. Actually, planning and implementation problem.
Right.
Because he has already told you, we are regarded as one of the most risky countries.
Yeah.
I was looking at the World Bank report, I think 2013. They were saying Uganda, about 200,000 Ugandans are vulnerable to disasters every year.
Yeah.
These include floods, famine, diseases, crop pests, and so forth. And also, we have agencies that are supposed to coordinate with each other, for instance, in the provision of information. Like in June, I read a report which I actually revisited this week of the Uganda National Meteorology Authority.
Yeah.
They were predicting above normal rains in some areas, particularly Central Eastern, that is Bugisu, Butaleja. They also named areas to do with Kasese, Rezori. They named them very well. Then they gave the implications. 1, we are likely to see floods. 2, diseases. 3, so who consumed that report? I expect that once such a report is produced, the relevant agencies in the office of the Prime Minister are the users.
Yeah.
And I can assure you that the district disaster management committees are idle because they are never funded. The strategy of government has always been that even if we have little money at the OPM, we can cry to development partners and we get the money. But I can assure you we cannot leave the country to the mercy of development partners all the time. For instance, he talked about climate change. It's not a one-day issue. like some people may think. We are seeing Isingiro, for instance. It is an area that has a lot of potential to feed us here with a lot of matoke. But what they are suffering is drought.
Yeah.
Now, shall we wait for Bazungu to come and give us money to rescue? These people have information about farming, they have the land, but they don't have water.
Yeah.
But then, in one day, we can even violate rules of Parliament and bail out one company with over 200 billion. So why can't we demonstrate the same about the sustainable livelihoods of our people?
People's lives.
So I believe the problem is both, it's for planning and implementation. But she also mentioned something about the will.
Yeah.
Maybe we don't have the will.
And the impunity.
And the
We don't.
yeah,
Which comes
that's
back
true.
to us, by the way.
You may find that the 100 and something billion to Karamoja, half of it may end up here.
Didn't
Kampala.
they say people were selling the foodstuffs, used that money to buy and sell to people who are honorable? Let's when the Prime Minister was presenting in Parliament, she presented beautiful things, some of them saying they have built some houses, they are doing this, they are doing that, but MPs were not satisfied. It kept of no, but for how long will this continue? What role do you think Parliament can play in really compelling the other arms of government, the executive in this case, to act in terms of in relation to disasters?
Parliament is the legislative arm of this government, and Parliament does appropriation.
Yeah.
Parliament also does oversight work over programs implemented by the executive. Unfortunately, oftentimes, even where appropriation has been made or done by Parliament, I think you've even heard this, and Parliament, does its oversight and produces a report. You have heard the executive say that Parliament recommendations are just advisory, and they can either take them on or ignore them. But if we do respect each other, there wouldn't be a problem. The executive would actually be picking some of these recommendations because they are things that Parliament picks from the ground, and having, maybe interfaced with the population and picked their ideas and maybe met other stakeholders outside even Parliament, like the civil society and so on. So picking all those ideas is what later, guides Parliament in coming up with the recommendations that it does. So Parliament will continue definitely to undertake its functions, but how I wish the executive can look at Parliament as another arm of government that is actually helping them to do their work. So if that would happen, then we would get away from this, some of the challenges that we actually see.
Yeah.
Because in appropriating funds, and this is where, we also have a problem, because this country is not short of resources. What we are short of is ideas and trying to look at clearly what our priorities are. And this is where Parliament now comes in during the budgeting to try and guide the executive that this is not a priority. Please put the funds here. And even when we appropriate, we have seen the Ministry of Finance disregarding what Parliament has done, and they go and do something else. So we still have a problem, and how I wish we can get back, because NRM has been in power for now 36 years. And let us know what drove us to come into power. It is, lack of respect for the rule, for the laws that we actually have. How we can get back and start respecting the various institutions of government, but also respect the various laws and policies that we have. This whole problem would not be a serious one. Namamve we have built. Some of those, wetlands, we have allocated the land. And it's government that actually allocates the land. People are not just building on community land. It is government that allocates most of the investors that have built in the wetlands, the land. It is government that is responsible for implementing the laws that are actually passed. But that doesn't happen. So how I wish that my government, the NRM government that I actually belong to, how I wish they can get back to the drawing board and see that their inaction is the reason that we are having all these problems today regarding the degradation of the environment. We have seen people cutting trees with impunity, guarded by security forces. We have seen people building on wetlands with impunity. We have seen all these, and really it can't be the NRM government led by President Yoweri Museveni disregarding its own laws that it made.
Unfortunately, it is. Yeah.
So the Prime Minister gave this wonderful response. Of course, I was part of the team, having been a Minister of State for Lands. We had a cabinet subcommittee where I also belonged, led by General Ali. We moved through the entire, Bugisu area and came up with that beautiful plan, to relocate people, resettle people. Some few houses have been built, of course, I don't remember the number now. But those are too few.
The Prime Minister said 101.
But those are too few,
And this has happened over the last, like 10 years.
Absolutely, because I left the Ministry of Lands in 2012. Although I went to health and still belong to the same committee because these challenges also, they are also health aspects. I still belong to the same committee. So it's a pity that it has taken us all these many years, over 6 years, because we also took time to complete the report and kept moving back and forth. So 6 years of implementation.
It's not being handled as an urgent issue.
6 years of implementation, and we only have 100 houses. Are we saying only these 100 and something are the ones who are displaced? There are definitely many more. Because we moved through the entire Bugisu, right from Bududa, looking at the cracks, which took us all the way up to Kapchorwa, that other side. So all these, that report was actually rich and had very clear recommendations, including restoring the forest cover, which has not been done. That has not been done.
I think, Agatha, what the Honorable is talking about is actually leadership. It's a problem of leadership. I saw somebody who was very annoyed on social media. He said, can you imagine all these leaders of Africa? He was comparing Africa to Ukraine, but saying we have the biggest chunk of arable land. We are the second biggest continent with about 1.4 billion people. But we are busy begging for wheat from Ukraine, which is being buttered, by Russia. You can imagine, there's no huge war here that is affecting us to do the things.
From growing our own wheat.
But even in that, we are still, the problem is still because there is no wheat is not coming from Ukraine. Really, a 1.3 billion population with leaders, 54 countries, and you can't have your act together. So it's a leadership problem, with the lack of relating what, because I think it was Amartya Sen who said, if you are a leader and you are governing over hungry people, you have no right to be a leader.
Have you guys seen the video of Raila Odinga?
You have no right to be a leader.
Saying they shouldn't compare Kenya with the West.
I know.
And the West is
Uganda as an example. You have no right to be a leader if you have hungry people dying of hunger, really. So it's a leadership thing.
That's true.
I saw some people trying to get annoyed at
Odinga.
At Raila Odinga, but I think sometimes facts are bitter.
That is true.
Because Uganda definitely as a country is not doing well when it comes to fighting corruption. I think we are among those in the last, about 134th most, is it 134th most corrupt country? So we are actually not doing well, and definitely Raila has been one person who has been speaking against corruption for a very long time. So he definitely does not want his
we're in
country.
the category of Somalia.
Yeah,
and
he
South
doesn't want his country to be compared to definitely Uganda. And it's like we wish him well as really the head of state. And I hope that he can actually now, when he takes over power, you know.
If he takes over.
The polls are in his favor, but you never know.
Is it if? No, when? It is now a matter of
It's a matter of when. It's a
49
matter of
versus 41.
it's a matter of when, yes, a matter of when, yeah, and
But,
which is soon. So we really hope that you know,
that for him he will.
yes,
be
he will
different.
lead. He will lead us, you know, because we shall want to be like Kenya.
Yeah.
Already Kenya is a middle income country. That is also another reason maybe why he says they shouldn't compare Kenya to Uganda. Uganda is not yet there. And for me, I think this issue of middle income, let us be careful, because once you are declared a middle income status, you lose out on certain things. This country is highly dependent on donors when it comes to health funding. And certainly once you're declared a middle income country, you lose out on some of this funding. And it will be a challenge providing health care. We've been reluctant in coming up with our own national health insurance scheme, which would, you know, help us get additional funding to the health sector. That has not happened. So, Raila's case, Ugandans should actually take that in good faith. And see how to improve.
So. I think so. So I wanted to give a point of correction. On the 101 houses I talked of, the Prime Minister said those were constructed in phase 1, and in phase 2 they constructed 140. But it's still, of course, still like a drop in the ocean. I have a message from the Honorable Karim Masaba, I mean, the MP of Mbale City Industrial Division, who says that government hasn't really done much, even in the interventions we are talking about. Because they have only received 20 tons of posho, 10 tons of beans, 150 pieces of tarpaulin, and only 1.2 million shillings for food distribution.
I got a message on my phone just as I was coming here, a few minutes. Somebody saying, Prime Minister, your staff that you sent on the ground are actually busy enjoying themselves, eating, enjoying the allowances in lodges and doing nothing for the population.
And the Prime Minister, in her speech, the other thing she said was that the President was sending 5 million to each bereaved family. Now, do we care more about those that have died and those that are still alive and need our help? It's really an issue of leadership, like you said, Jeff, when Honorable was talking about that area where people are moved before winter. I thought, those ones have a government. It's the government you belong to and
other
belong
countries
to.
Actually go through simulations. What was talking about simulations in case of an earthquake, in case of a flood, in case of these huge winds that in case of heat waves. They go through simulations. Even actually young kids in schools, so that they know what to do in the event.
I remember when we were still young, my father used to work in Kilembe mines. And we used to have these earthquakes. So whenever there was going to be an earthquake, we would all be moved and would sit outside in the compound, not in the houses. Because you can never tell what will happen. And maybe you're safer outside than in the house. So some of those are the things. But I also want to say that it is actually also, we are talking about Mbale. But what happened in Karamoja is actually another serious issue that should not have actually happened. In this era where we have all these water sources, Lake Choga, all these rivers. If Gaddafi could turn this desert in Libya into what it is, and people are growing crops even
using a river that originates from here.
Surely can't we extend irrigation schemes to Karamoja so that the people of Karamoja can grow foods other than relying on just the cows and the milk and the little sorghum that they're actually growing. So I think it is something that I would say we have not put our actions together. We haven't done that. Because you can't have a whole Ministry of Agriculture. Now we are going into the parish development model. How is it going to benefit the people in Karamoja, surely? How? When they actually have no and nothing, you know.
No irrigation.
No irrigation, no nothing.
Yeah.
They are not business people. They just look after cattle and goats and whatever. And now even the gold, the rich minerals that would help employ the people there,
But also gifted
they
by
are not
nature.
going to be beneficiaries.
Yeah.
They're not
Esther,
going to be
gifted by
beneficiaries.
nature. When we are called the Great Lakes region because of how many lakes do we have in Uganda. Doesn't that embarrass you a little bit to actually talk about drought in Uganda? The second deepest freshwater lake in the world, Lake Victoria, and so many other lakes around. But you compare, as Honorable talks about Libya, then you ask yourself, so okay, were we gifted by nature then to actually become reluctant on how to use the wealth
Or
that
to
we have?
even destroy the nature. Dr. Werikhe, I want to go back to the role of Parliament that Honorable Sarah talked about. We know, especially on appropriation, because here, if we have a contingencies fund that has no money, there's no way we are going to prepare for these disasters or even have any response without it. How satisfied are you with Parliament in playing that role of appropriation? We were here discussing the issue of this budget that was passed. There was a minority report of the budget committee that was very, very, very good. Yeah. If I was a Parliament, it was the report I would have adopted.
Right.
Because it was talking of the 1.8 billion you're sending to State House. State House, which has one adult, two adults, both working, both having a salary. Their children are not even there. Why are we spending this much here when there are these priority critical areas? We had the money to State House, the money to defense, that is all unexplained. And we had a Parliament that couldn't question that did it. We had a Parliament that went and increased their own allowances. How can we expect it to be the one to now come in to ensure that the issue of disaster management?
Parliament true has a very critical role to play.
Yeah.
But we're having a challenge of failure to respect various institutions of the state. And also a challenge where individuals within these institutions like the Parliament really disregard their role and act as though they are fused with another institution. For instance, I looked at the National Development Plan. It prioritizes increasing forest cover from 9% to 12%. Up to the next to 2025. But the same Parliament is approving the gazetting of 3 forest reserves, I think in the Kayunga area. So this is a contradiction.
Parliament has not approved. That was a motion that was brought and it has not yet been.
Was it supported?
It wasn't. It still remained there.
But I have seen MPs, including from the same area, and to make matters worse, belonging to the opposition, advocating, also supporting the same thing. And it's not actually the first example. There are a number of things we have seen in that house where MPs will talk in the media, but when it comes to the voting, they will do the opposite.
Yeah.
There are so many examples, especially when it comes even to loans, borrowing money to do something. And let me give this example recently, Lobroko. I really liked the debate when it evolved.
Yeah.
It was very okay, but at the end, I saw a lot of things changing, and actually even the House adjourned until 2nd August. So I think we should be seen to be doing what we actually are required to do. Because if we saw strikes, we pass the budget today, then the next day, other people are coming in, and some MPs who never raised it during the time they had a chance want to show themselves in the camera. But when during the real budget deliberations, you could not see their voice. So we have seen these contradictions. I think let's try to show that we stand with the people, because other than the executive, okay, Parliament is a people's house. You are elected to speak for that constituency. If you come from a disaster-prone area, why don't you defend a budget? I saw a representative from, a minister for a certain region saying, no, these people are pretending that the hunger is not there. The food is enough. The next day, I see a letter written by a cow of
People dying.
of people who have died. We actually within the town council,
200
meaning
and
that
something.
So
the number is much more than we expected. We have seen allegations of MPs in a certain region sharing resources made for interventions in that area. In this case, I will not mention names, but these allegations are there. Can we try maybe to appear to be doing what we are supposed to do, and also to act with integrity? Because every time we don't act with integrity, even if you have done nothing, they will say you have stolen. So that's a challenge.
Honorable, before we go for a break, did you want to respond to Dr. Werikhe's?
Yeah, first, I want to state that I am not aware of Parliament increasing its allowances. This my fuel, my housing allowance
Was for travel and committees, but you know there's a 190 billion they added on their budget.
No, that is overall for the for Parliament for travel. I mean, the numbers have increased, and you must know that really, the last financial year, Parliament was actually incapacitated. We could not do our oversight work. We failed to actually travel to do oversight, and that definitely affects performance. And of course, this particular time, this particular financial year, aware that the cost of fuel has gone up, actually double.
Yeah.
You know, that is the area that, you know, it has been covered now, that there is some money for inland travel, but also the fuel aspect of it. Because initially, I think members were being paid about 3,500 for a liter of fuel.
Yeah.
Fuel is now almost 7,000 shillings. I think it was moved to 6,000. So you can't say members increased their allowance.
For us to know and
I can still bring my pay slip. It still has the 6 million shillings that I was receiving as salary. So really, let us be sometimes what is said. Of course, if they had increased my housing, I would gladly come and say, my sitting allowance has been increased, my housing, but it remained the same. Surely, yeah. Sometimes, yeah.
Yeah, but Agatha, of course,
be...
I hear Honorable, I think, of course, she's right to the extent of what happens through the processes. But what Gerald didn't talk about, you know how the record deal was passed in Parliament the following day when the Deputy Speaker came. There was a lot of controversy.
Yeah.
Some members actually thought they could even raise issues of quorum and so on. It was stampeded through. So that speaks to...
It wasn't just stampeded through.
Yes.
There was procedural issues, there was everything, because he put the question, he moved the motion himself, put the question himself, answered it himself, declared the results that were not there.
So,
that is the truth. That is the truth.
So you can't blame, therefore you cannot blame members of Parliament.
That's what I wanted to say.
I personally was in the House.
Right.
That's the day I actually moved the marriage bill.
Right.
And then I was called out. Actually, I was called
that
there is this urgent matter. So when I moved out, actually to meet the Speaker, because she wanted to discuss something very urgent with me. And then when I was in her sitting room, we all saw people, you know, rising up, and we asked ourselves. She also asked and wondered what has gone wrong in the House. So we started making phone calls because we were talking, so we reduced the volume. We were not able to follow.
Right.
And then that's when one member said, Roko has been passed, but the previous night,
it was not even on the
we debated this matter, and the Speaker deferred the matter and said, I give government 2 weeks, go and clean up and return. So that's what we all expected.
So
don't blame members of Parliament.
Maybe to ask the honorable
the institution of Parliament.
Okay, yes, blame the institution. But
let me give you information that the leader of
be
opposition lodged a motion with the Speaker of Parliament and the clerk to have it revisited, but the Speaker guided that it will be at an appropriate time. Now we wonder what an appropriate time will be if the money will have maybe been given to Roko or something.
Which speaks to the independence or lack of independence of the institution of Parliament.
Let's take a short commercial break and return to maybe finalize on this issue, but also talk about the bills that have been returned to Parliament by President Museveni. We'll be right back.
Every Friday at 2 p.m. on Civic Space TV Online on Facebook and YouTube. We invite you to be part of this conversation. Civic Space TV, freedom always.
Welcome back from that short commercial break. And as we said, we want to discuss the issue of returning the bills to Parliament. I don't know if there's something any of my panelists wanted to say about the issue we're discussing of disasters, but I am hoping we have exhausted it. I am still with Dr. Werikhe from AFLI, Honorable Sarah Opendi, the woman MP for Tororo District, and Jeff Wadulo from CSBAG. Now, the President has returned 3 bills to Parliament in the duration of this Parliament, but I think notably in the last few months. That is the National or Local Content Bill, then the excise duty bill, and the mining bill. And in those bills, he asks that particular clauses be reconsidered by Parliament, and actually puts what he would prefer the clause to look like. He has that powers by virtue of Article 91 of the Constitution, which says he can return it for reconsideration. But my question is, how does this affect the powers of Parliament to pass laws? Because in the case of the mining bill, I think the clause he's talking about talks about the thresholds of it is clause 8. Now, if Parliament seemingly does what the President wants them to do when they are passing bills, how does it affect the powers of Parliament to let me start with you, Jeff, this time. You've said you have been party to the National Content Bill in particular.
That's right. Well, the President has those powers, and he can use them very well, or he might also use them for selfish interests. But for the one that I've looked at, and that's the Local Content Bill, it had quite a number of issues. Maybe the general comment is that a number of those bills, especially the mining and minerals bill, was passed very, very quickly. I think there was not enough consultation of the different stakeholders. So there were many clauses that you could have had more information about. So you could say the number of bills that are being returned by the President could reflect on that, the speed by which a number of bills were passed, but also the limited consultation. On the Local Content Bill, which we participated in reviewing as CSBAG, we did find that there were some valid concerns where the President was concerned about the powers of a unit that is going to be created in the Ministry of Finance to be in charge of a number of responsibilities, some of which would rest with some institutional bodies like the Solicitor General, like the Auditor General, like immigration and so on. And you'd find that all these would create a conflict of interest if this unit was made that powerful. So our suggestion was, we did agree with the concern of the President that, well, instead of having an all-powerful unit in the Ministry of Finance to do with local content, can we have some kind of one-stop center? Which I think there was an attempt when they were trying to improve the investment environment for this country. They also tried to create some one-stop center for registration of businesses, and also expedite all other obligations, where you have URSB together with immigration, you have all those together, so that it makes it easy for the investors to get work done. So similarly, for local content, we said why don't we have a one-stop center where the unit remains in the Ministry of Finance, because, well, if it is handling things to do with loans and all that, then it is supported by staff seconded from the different MDAs, and then they will take particular responsibility for those other things. For example, when a foreigner is coming to Uganda, immigration may only want to deal with the issues whether they are citizens or non-citizens, but they may not have the capacity to assess whether they are qualified to take a job that would have been for Ugandan rather than that can remain. So we say, but if we have secondments from the different, so that would go maybe to the ministry in charge of labor.
Yeah.
They have standards,
Yes.
and for particular qualifications of different jobs. So for me, some of the issues that the president had in this local content bill were very valid because they were going to create conflicts. But then you'd also see some where we said no, some could be rather selfish. I'm just trying to remember what particular clause that was. But there was also one where I think that said that for all positions, no, I think there was something around exclusivity. The local content bill was talking about excluding the supply of goods and services to Uganda and Ugandans. And we proposed and said, instead of having exclusivity, I remember using the term, I said, if you have the power to close the door and close others out, you should not lose the power to open it when you want to get out. So not locking yourself in. So we said, why don't we mainstream flexibility? Instead of saying exclusive to Uganda, the supply of some particular goods and services. But what about where those particular services in terms of quality or even availability are absent in the country? What about the level of skill of particular positions? So we said, instead of saying exclusively supplied by Uganda and Ugandans, we said have a first call. Have a first call. We said first, let's consider what is available in Uganda. If absent, then we go regional. If absent region, then perhaps we go continental. So for us, the spirit was that even when we want to protect local content, we should not be doing it in such a way that when we are asked to provide, we do not have, and then we are locked up in the law. And think so. Yes, some pros and cons, but I think the whole thing about returning these bills, some of the concerns actually you could say are very valid. I think the president has a team of very good people who look through the gaps of some of these laws. But also the others is that some concerns may be of a political economy nature, and we want to see whether if Parliament passed it in goodwill, then they would be competing with the powers of the executive versus Parliament.
Okay, Honorable Sir, in your view, what do you think is leading to this return of the bills, and what are its implications?
First and foremost, we must know that most of the bills are actually brought by government, and of course they are discussed in cabinet before they come to Parliament. And at that stage, sometimes the president is present, sometimes he is partially present during the bill, the discussion on the bill. And once cabinet has passed this, it comes to Parliament. And in Parliament, definitely consultations are made. And following those consultations, some amendments to these bills are actually made. But in making those amendments, maybe they have, gone and made amendments that the executive may not agree with. And therefore, when the bill now goes to the president for assent, some ministers may get to the president, write to him, and say, while this was passed by the House, there is going to be this problem. But also I am aware that the president has a legal team that scrutinizes the bill. And normally in returning these bills, it's not the entire bill, it is just a few clauses. For example, if I look at the mining bill, I think what the president's reason for returning the bill was a genuine one, because he disagreed, I think, with 2 or 3 clauses. And one of them in the mining bill was setting up a tribunal, that if somebody has a complaint against the minister after a license has been issued to another company, the person can complain to tribunal. And the president said, now we want to set up a tribunal just for for this. Why not use the courts, for example? You can go to high court, and that was a valid reason. The other reason that he gave for returning the bill was, I think, on the definition of large-scale mining.
Right.
And he said that the definition in the act as it was sent to him left out certain companies like Klembe Mines and others. And he requested for a revision of that, what large-scale mining was. And I think you remember when the matter came to the floor.
Right.
Then there were, if you watched, there were issues. The minority presented a very serious report that most of us actually agreed with. And we did not agree with the majority report. And that did not pass. So they had to go back and harmonize. And of course came back, and we now adopted the recommendations. So I don't think it is so much of undermining the powers of Parliament to legislate. Sometimes we can also make mistakes. We can also make maybe some amendments we could not have paid clear thought to it. For example, setting up the tribunal. Why would anybody argue about that? That is clear cut. So I think the president returns these bills in good faith. I'm yet to see an area where there is a personal interest. And I'm sure if that would occur, then we would have a serious stalemate, because the laws are very clear that if Parliament does not agree with the president's position and sends the bill to him as it is, again for a second time, and if he returns it and they send it back, then it would automatically become law. So we are yet to reach that stage. But most of the times, I think there are valid reasons. Because I remember even the landlord-tenant bill, when we were discussing it, it was returned, and he disagreed, I think, with 2 clauses. I think one was on the common area. I have forgotten, but it was actually a valid, genuine reason that we actually scrutinized. But his other second reason, I don't quite remember, we actually did not agree with it and maintained our earlier position, and that's what passed.
Okay, when I read his letter over the excise duty bill, he returned it saying that it was on excise duty at a rate of 40% or 4,000 per kilogram on sacks of bags of polymers of ethylene and other plastics. And he was saying the decision by Parliament to reject that proposal upsets or undermines the executive. But what if Parliament is, in its wisdom, is thinking that maybe a certain duty, a certain tax on let's take an example of the social media tax that had been brought. So Parliament has the power and the responsibility to protect its people that it represents. So if it is brought back in that way, which is what I think this is, wouldn't it be problematic?
Yeah, of course, certainly. That's why I said I'm yet to see that kind of clause. Most of the amendments or the reasons for returning other bills, Parliament has actually agreed and amended, or even amended what the president comes up with. But this particular one, actually, we have not yet discussed it. We're waiting for the committee to get to the floor, and then we'll definitely look at it. But of course, I don't think it's undermining the powers of the executive, because we are representatives of the people. And when it comes to issues of taxation, we must be mindful of the effects of our decisions on the common person. So maybe the president used the very strong words of undermining the executive. But I think the executive should also know that it is Parliament's responsibility to legislate and make these laws. So I think this goes back to what I said before, that we have three arms of government that need to respect one another and complement one another. Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe what Honorable could tell us on this new decision, especially of the 11th Parliament, to expire bills that had not been assented to. Is that based in law? I think this is the first time we're hearing it, where like the NSS
the lapsing
bill,
of the bills,
lapsing of bills. Is that based in law or is it administrative and could be challenged?
It's not administrative. I think it's an interpretation of the law. And that is what the Speaker based on. He interpreted the law that way, although his predecessor...
Has it started in the 11th Parliament?
Yes, it started.
Yes, it started with us.
They used to shelve them and go where they have reached.
If it had been passed but had not been assented to, the President would go ahead and still,
But most of those bills actually were returned.
Yeah, NSS bill was also returned.
Most of those bills were actually returned, save for a few, like the employment bill, which was not assented to, and the President did not return it. Neither did he assent to it, neither did he comment. You know, there was just total silence. So it is somewhere in the shelf.
It should have become
law. It should have become law. It should have become law. But it has been reintroduced anyway. So to me, I think it is an issue of interpretation, because even the Speaker, the previous Speaker, the Right Honourable Rebecca Kadaga, would actually guide that these bills be reintroduced. They are saved but reintroduced, you know? Yeah.
But Honourable, what about your own bill that you're sponsoring right now as
the marriage bill?
As a private member?
Yeah.
We had the MAD bill. I don't know whether it's now a new version of what was there before.
It's an amendment.
No,
it's an
but
amendment. What is
just
it?
Allow me tell you that
right.
Actually the marriage and divorce bill was a government bill.
Right.
And the government, the Honourable Kahindo Tafire came and withdrew the bill. So there is no bill before the House.
Okay,
yes,
so
there is no marriage and divorce bill before Parliament. It was withdrawn.
Okay.
And with the promise that they were going to, you know, take into consideration the various views of the people and return. And he never returned.
People for consultation.
Yes, and this is why I have come up with the private members bill, and mine is the marriage bill.
12 years down the road.
So
it's in a different
Dr. Werikhe, we keep singing this whole separation of powers and independence of Parliament. But apart from the bills that are returned, we have seen the President wrote a letter to to Parliament, to the Speaker, after the passing of the budget. And actually in that letter asked, who gave you the power to distort my budget? So, but also the Constitution, when you look at even appropriation itself, the fact that the budget comes from, it's the budget of the President.
Right.
Now, when we are looking at the bills, he has a right to assent, he has a right to return it. What can be done about this whole? Should we forget about the fallacy of separation of powers? And
no, we shouldn't forget about it.
How can we reinforce it?
In the law, it is very clear what the other one has to do and what this one does. The only challenge, like we have talked, is about respecting the institutions.
Yeah.
If you head the executive, you should also look at the Parliament as an institution that has a role to play. Like in this case, we pointed at the language being used in this bill, that it undermines me as the executive.
Yeah.
But also in the same bill, I saw where he's also concerned about the 20% tax introduced on sugar confectionaries. I don't know. I don't know whether the reason is to protect those involved in that sector, or it's just out of his own wish. But for me, what I would say is that we actually, especially as a civil side, need to reinforce this, that the doctrine of separation of powers should stand, even if we are expected to work together. Because Whereas a cabinet, the president brings the budget, but parliament has the right to reallocate. They know the problems, I think, in the countryside compared to the executive. Many times I've seen these MPs challenging ministers, and ministers have no clue of what they are talking about. But they are in touch with the people every day. So my appeal is for the executive to respect their role. But of course, like the minister, sorry, the MP said,
we should leave the minister title with her, because
no, we wish her to be a minister.
There are safeguards. The same law which says the president can return a bill. But if he returns it 3 times, it can become law. But we are yet to test. Yes, we are yet to test that. We shouldn't forget about.
I think there's a time we almost did in the 9th or 10th Parliament where it must have been this bill of registration of persons, or the private PPP bill that he returned several times. But then I think Parliament conceded on the second time. Honorable,
but there are also, just a bit, there are also cases where we have seen Parliament stand on its feet and actually the executive goes and changes decisions, like the issue of Uganda Airlines. You remember what happened? The minority report took the day and actually things changed. So there are cases like that.
Even the coffee bill, coffee deal. But I just wanted to, somebody said, I think used an imagery and said, you see, if the executive undermines the other arms of government, it's actually like trying to disable itself and still hope that it will still function. Because how government works is that the three arms need to really be functional. Then he said it is as ridiculous as a pilot who takes off in a plane and then in mid-air he cuts off one wing and hopes to still land properly. It doesn't.
I think Justice Kanyihamba equated it to 3 cooking stones, whereby if you removed one, but well, I don't know, I think it's sometimes governments that want excessive power, especially executives like ours, which has been long in power, which wants certain decisions made, wouldn't want a strong independent parliament. But Honorable Sarah, Jeff talked about the issue of the mining bill being rushed. It's not just the mining and minerals bill. I have read reports of now 3 bills, and all of them say the same thing. We did not consult. Even the ECOP bill, the ECOP law now, it happened with, was it the electricity amendment bill? It has happened so many times in this parliament now that every report says we didn't have enough time to consult, we didn't go to the stakeholders. What is the problem that this parliament, and as I've been asking that question, they go and pass a bill in 2 hours. We have seen previous parliaments where bills, are really scrutinized, each clause by clause. Maybe sometimes they take a week, 2 on the same. Is there a problem with this particular parliament now? And doesn't that put into question the issue of quality of these laws being passed?
Well, I belong to the Physical Infrastructure Committee, and we have had 2 bills so far: the Physical Planners Registration Bill, the Landlord Tenants Bill, and we had sufficient time. I don't know what goes on in other committees. And we actually consulted all the stakeholders and brought the bill on the floor. But if that is happening, like for the mining bill, I have had those complaints that the committee did not consult widely. I think they wanted to benchmark, they couldn't do that.
And that's both the reports, even the majority report admitted that lack of consultation.
Yeah, but which is unfortunate, because making a laws are made to actually, deal with issues at the community level, and they are not made in a vacuum. And for that reason, there has to be adequate consultation. Consult all the stakeholders so that you come with a good law. So if a law is rushed, then we shall end up seeing amendments being made to a law hardly, 1 year into existence, and the amendments coming up. That is not good. But what I know is that the current speaker has introduced a different method of work, where actually, which is good also, where, for example, she invites the opposition with the government, with the committee leadership, to ask them whether they had any areas of dissent. And they actually sit and say, yes, we disagree in areas A, B, C, D, E. So she allows them time to go and sit and harmonize before the bill is actually introduced in the House. And that could be the reason why you think that the bill is actually rushed. But people have harmonized behind the scenes, and they've come up with a bill that actually they agree to. Because even when you come out of a committee, there are still disagreements. And therefore, because not all of us belong to that committee. So I may not belong to that committee, but I have my views. I have not had time to present them. So I expect when this bill is brought on the floor of the House to actually give my views. And that is where she actually says, whoever has an issue, go and sit and harmonize. So by the time the bill comes on the floor, actually there is hardly, sometimes you may find very few.
How does that affect the role of the Committee of the Whole House at and the stages of passing the bill?
Yeah, because that is now,
because the Speaker surely can't pick out every member of the 528 to know what issue they have with the particular bill.
No, normally members who have issues with the particular bill are present. No, not on the committee. I am actually in the House when I have an interest in a particular bill. And definitely she will know those who have issues. They've already, because you're supposed to even write and circulate your views. Yes, you write and circulate. So already they know that there are these 10 members, and maybe 5 of them are actually on this particular clause. So then you are told to go and harmonize. So you come with a harmonized position on the floor. And therefore this is why sometimes people think that bills are rushed. Yeah, and of course, like I said, people's methods of work differ.
Yeah.
Because the rules actually say that when a bill has been brought, then members debate. Those days we would debate even for 2 days.
Weeks.
And then after debate,
Up to midnight.
then we go into now the actual scrutiny of the bill clause by clause.
Yeah.
Right.
But you should also know that in dealing with bills, not many members actually participate.
Right.
And if you look closely, there are just a few people, not normally beyond 100 people in the House when you are passing. The others are present. They are around. They are around.
About 20 actually.
Yeah.
This week I saw about 20.
In a serious, actively engaging on the bill, you may find like 20 members or 30 who are critically following through. So you can't have the whole House when it comes to handling the bill. And this has been over the years. This is my 3rd term. I have seen this over the years. That's what happens.
Yeah. Okay, Jeff, you had mentioned it, so you have read the bills that have. Do you think that has affected the sort of rush? Do you think it has affected the quality of the laws we are passing?
I think what the Honourable is referring to could be partly right. Where, for example, I've also seen that happen, where even at the committee stage, where they're considering clause by clause, I think there's a point where I saw the Speaker say, for all those that are having an issue, I think there was Honourable Nandala and so on. He actually said, Honourable Nandala, you lead that ad hoc team, go, reconcile, come back and into the main House. So yes, I think I love that style. I think it's very productive. But also the fact that this Parliament was trying to pride on the number of bills passed. Actually, when I was comparing, Gerald, when we were looking at 10th Parliament first session
Yes.
versus 11th Parliament first session, this Parliament passed a few more bills than
the first year of the 10th.
the first year of the 10th Parliament. So
There's
you could
a
say
danger of focusing more on quantity than
quantity
quality.
rather than the
Yeah.
quality. So it could compromise, and perhaps that's not surprising why a number are being returned by the president. You would see that perhaps what consultation would have delivered.
Or what a keen eye.
Yes.
Those days there would be a problem on words, may
Yes.
and shall, and
Yes.
it would be
Yes.
2 hours on which word you
Yes.
go with.
Yeah. So
that showed really
so
secretly.
so like for the local content bill, maybe because it was also a private member's bill, so a lot of clauses came in there and were really so hard. And then you would say, okay, but how did this pass the committee's eye? How did it pass the committee of the whole house? And when it goes to the president and he returns it, then you say that is in good faith. So I think it is both pros and cons in terms of if it is about speed in delivering the number of bills, let's take care of the quality in the process.
Okay, thank you. I promised to the audience that I will discuss briefly the issue of Mapinduzi.
Wow.
And for the interest of our audience, Honorable Martin Ojara Mapinduzi is the chairperson of PAC, Public Accounts Committee, Local Government, and the leadership of the opposition in Parliament, which is in charge of allocating leaders. Those committees had written a letter to the Speaker changing the Honorable Ojara Mapinduzi and replacing him with Gilbert Olanya.
Right.
And the Speaker said that this is not guided, that it shouldn't happen. They're in the middle of doing their report on the Auditor General's report of 2019-2020. But that has really raised eyebrows because the rules give party whips that power to redesignate leaders of committees, because they're the ones that know the performance. Especially in this case, that particular committee has not really performed the expectations of many. Dr. Werikhe, what is your view on that?
For me, as a member from the civil society, my interest is to see that a committee and its leadership are delivering on their mandate. So in this case, we would ask ourselves, was the leadership delivering? If it was not delivering, then who has the mandate to deploy or to even to remove him from the leadership? What I know is that the opposition leadership, under the law, under the rules, are supposed to deploy the leader of that committee. But a certain precedent was set, which I didn't think was really good in the previous parliament, where the Forum for Democratic Change decided to withdraw Honorable Abdu Katuntu, and then the then speaker deliberately refused and said they have not accomplished this business, so they cannot remove. But then the other side was saying, but we are the supervisors, we will ensure that this new team completes. Exactly. But the speaker refused until the period she wanted the leadership to change. So I think Parliament is there to guarantee the rule of law, because they pass the law, they also pass their own rules. So it will be too ugly for Parliament to really violate its own rules. And changing goalposts is going to set another example where another speaker will come one day and do one of the weird things you never expect. So I believe that we should respect what the rules say instead of changing goalposts. Because if it's about performance, it will affect the whole business of the committee.
Okay. Honorable Sarah, the speaker referred to Rule 196, which says a chairperson or deputy chairperson of a committee may be redesignated at any time of his or her tenure by the relevant whip with the approval of the House. The approval of the House, I think, is where the problem is.
It comes later.
You have been in Parliament for 15 years. This is your third term. How has it been happening? How does this, with the approval of the House, happen? Are you subjected to members being the one to decide who becomes the leader of the committee?
Those are our rules. The rules have not just been written now. The rules have been there.
But they keep changing.
And you have,
parliament.
every parliament, the rules change. But normally we pick from the previous parliament, and the changes are normally minimal. Like, I think what changed much in this particular rule was on the Prime Minister's question time. So that one regarding designation of members has not changed. Because over time, the whips designate, but they bring these lists and read them on the floor, and the speaker puts the question and it is carried. There has really never been, you know, hassle or debate. That has been the rule, because it is the powers are given to the whips to designate members. So even my belonging to physical infrastructure is subjected to the House approval. And there cannot be business until members have been designated to various committees, and then thereafter the House approves. So I think let's not read too much into the House approval. And I want to appeal to colleagues that let's respect the whips. If a whip has brought, you know, has designated, removed the Honorable Ojara Mapenduzi, and then, you know, brings on board, redesignates now, appoints Olanya as now the chairperson of the park local government. If the name is brought on the floor, I mean, why would we start, you know, undermining the powers of the whips? I think that is not good. And of course, the matter has not been brought to the floor. It was only proposed, and the speaker, and I know that the speaker and the leader of opposition are going to sit and agree. And what I'm just learning now, I didn't know, was that there had never been any report from this committee. Honestly,
none has been tabled.
Honestly, it is almost, I think, it is 1 year since we took over. Surely there should have been a report presented, and the audit reports were brought by the Committee on Local Government, and no, they were brought by the Auditor General, I think, in December. By now, there should have been some reports of certain entities delivered by this.
No, there hasn't been any.
But let's respect the whips, and I believe at the end of the day, that is what will prevail.
Jeff, I wanted to remind you that the precedent he talked about, which the speaker cites, there's the problem. In that precedent, the then speaker Rebecca Kadaga and Honorable Katuntu are close. In the issue here, the current speaker is a close friend of Honorable Ojara Mapenduzi. You remember Ojara Mapenduzi's role in the censorship of Werikhe as a commissioner. Isn't it going to be problematic if we are going to let people use their personal relationships and friendships to determine who leads or who chairs what committee or any other role?
In my reading through it, actually, it's more of the spirit rather than the law. Because recently, we had members. You remember the most recent redesignation? Actually, most people kept their dockets. There were just a few people who moved.
The session committees.
Yes, most people kept their dockets. So using the spirit, you could see that, well, there was no problem there. Because you see, the only time you really get to have to test the law is when the spirit has failed. And perhaps that is when there's a lot of contention. So I think for me, this is a hangover from that conflict. Remember, I think there's a stalemate. I don't know what has happened. Honorable Zake's fate, they refused to withdraw him and replace him with somebody else.
I think they want to challenge that decision
in court. So there is still a hangover, but you remember that Mapenduzi was at the center of getting Zake out of the commission. So my thinking is by the speaker referring to the law means that the spirit by which she is referring to the law is in reference to what has happened previously. And that might create another challenge when, for example, if we're talking about somebody else.
Exactly.
If
Maybe that wouldn't be a problem.
If we're talking about somebody else other than
this is a good thing.
Yes.
That you are protecting committee leaders from their appointers to influence them.
Yeah, so we shouldn't quote the law with convenience when it works for us. I think it should be standard for all purposes.
Jeff, you go to Parliament a lot. You must have realized that the opposition whip has put in all committees mechanisms to find out about performance of his members. I don't know if the NRM has done the same, but there are attendance lists, find out who is contributing, who is not. And now, considering the fact that this particular committee has not yet done much, it could be that it has nothing to do with what he did to one of their members, but a lot to do with the performance of the committee, which really, this whole interpretation standoff.
You know, when you're in the eye of the storm, sometimes people look at the detail, and usually the devil is in the detail.
Yeah, conflict of interest.
Yes.
We should be able to withdraw ourselves from those.
People start saying, but Honorable Mapinduzi was, a star performer in his district. When he came to Parliament, everyone had high expectations. Then he's in the middle of this storm. So people now start looking at, what else? What are the other 7 things we don't know about?
I think we have to stop this conversation here. I'm going to allow each one of you to give us parting shots in 1 minute.
As a Ugandan, and specifically as a person from Mount Elgon, I really request the government to give the support, the adequate support to the teams on the ground, and also as they also monitor the likely disasters that may happen in that region, but also the other regions. We discussed here the issue of hunger. If you go to Buyende, the Basoga are saying, Endaleli kutuita. If you go to Teso, the people are saying, Etenge. You go to Karamoja, it's, so...
How do they say it in Karamoja?
Well.
That's what I don't know. But we really need to pay attention to all these things. And know the early warning signals, monitor how they occur, and also prepare for response.
Thank you, Gerald. Yes, Honorable Sir.
To the viewers, we have over the years had disasters. Let us, each one of us, reflect on our actions. The government has a responsibility of implementing its laws and policies and guiding the population, enforcing them. The population has a responsibility of ensuring that it also does its bit. You have land, plant trees. It is raining now, let us plant trees. You don't need money to plant a tree. There are trees that can be, just 300 shillings to buy a seedling. I don't think people can fail to find 3,000 shillings to buy 10 seedlings. So let us plant trees as communities. And of course, also use the environment in a sustainable way. Government, as you allocate land, please be mindful of also the decisions that you make, because some of the challenges we are facing now are as a result of government's inaction. Allocating land in wetlands to people who are going to construct. I know there are countries like the Netherlands which are wetlands, but let us allocate land, build, but while ensuring that really we live, we construct in a manner that is sustainable and in a manner that will sustain this environment. Otherwise, once again, my condolences to those who lost their dear ones, and let us learn from what has happened in Bugisu. But also government, I want to appeal to you. We cannot have famine in a country that is well endowed with all these water sources. Where are the irrigation schemes? I think we can do better. Let us prioritize investments in the environment, prioritize investments in agriculture, so that we can deal with this challenge of famine.
Thank you, Honorable. Yes, Jeff.
Yeah, thanks, Agatha, and everyone who has participated in the show. My last word is that you can never shortchange nature. Nature has a way it pays you back what you paid, and it comes more viciously. The cost is much higher than if you obeyed the laws of nature. And calling on government, I think we need to, Honorable, we need to go back to that law that was repealed. I think that having no money for the contingencies fund, having reduced it from 3.5 to 0.5 for me was a mistake to begin with. Number two,
let's hope that even the 0.5, that's what it is.
That's what it's supposed to do. But more important is that when it happens, when disaster strikes, there's no discrimination. Okay, usually it usually hits the poor more, by the way. Rarely do you hear that a minister has been killed in a disaster or a president's house has. So the poor usually are the receiving end of the lack of decision making at the top echelons. So, but for me, as a responsible global citizen, if we did the right things, we don't have to have the effects immediate. I think it is we all stand to gain as the world, as a country, as leaders. Yeah, so basically that's how we should be dealing with issues of climate change.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Honorable. I was really particularly happy to have you. You are that lone voice now. At least for you, people don't say when she was eating, she wasn't talking, and now
she
she's
always
not.
talks.
She has always spoken.
Both ways.
And I want to appeal to her and other people in Parliament that are brave enough to stand for what is right.
Right.
To really maybe have a way of making Parliament to stand on its two legs, on the powers and the mandate it has to help us in resolving these issues. Because if we are talking about disaster management, we are starting from there, that you're making sure disaster management has been appropriated enough funds, and those funds you're following up through your oversight role to make sure they do what they're supposed to do. For us on Focus on Parliament, we really focus on Parliament. We say, okay, if we can't reach the executive, let us task Parliament to really put it on its tenterhooks to make sure what is supposed to be done is done. From us, it's a good weekend. We will be with you again next weekend, yes, on Focus on Parliament. And I also condole with the people that have lost their loved ones, lost lives in the places of Dr. Werikhe and Jeff and other people. And those displaced, I hope that government can really intervene as quickly as possible. Thank you very much. Have a nice weekend.